Hello and welcome to etbfsi.com. My name is Amol Dethe, and I'm in conversation with Shankarsan Banerjee, the CIO of RBL Bank, and Riddhi Datta, the Regional Sales Director from Backbase. Gentlemen, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Amol. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Amol.
Great, thank you. Glad to have both of you here, and it's our endeavor to, in fact, try and connect and get the perspective from BFSI companies and the tech companies as well. Mr. Banerjee, to start with you, I will ask you first. You are kind of a youngest bank in the country and adopted a lot of digital innovations. If you could give us some sense on how can banks align reinvention and digital banking strategies, would like to have your perspective on that.
So, banks for a long while only competed with other banks, and therefore there was a certain amount of cohesion in the directions that all of them took. We were all very physical, branch centric, and paper centric, and now that has changed of late. We have started being forced to compete with a lot of digital players,
Right.
and therefore, and also our customer base has become far more digital than it used to be.
Yes.
So therefore, we have started transforming to meet both the competitive challenge and the transformation in our customer expectations.
Right.
This has forced us to become far more digital than we used to be.
Yes.
It's not just our retail customers that are digitally savvy. Our corporate customers, our commercial customers, our trade finance customers have all become much more digitally savvy. And therefore, they have started expecting us to become equally or more digitally savvy. That's really how our transformation started. We, as RBL Bank, have been investing in this for a while. RBL, as you know, is an older bank. I mean, it's been around for a long time, and part of that journey was our digital transformation. So we transformed to a digital bank quicker than many of our peers did.
Right.
And a reason for that was this, because we saw the market evolving digitally, we saw our customers evolving digitally. So we launched banking as a service. We launched API banking in a big way. We launched, Mobank, MyCard, digital channels. We focused on a lot more, and it's been an ongoing transformation, like most of banking. But for us, it's a bit more of a pressing concern because we are a challenger bank.
Oh, great to know that term, Mr. Banerjee, that you are a challenger bank. In fact, the bankers in India are hardly using that term challenger bank. Good to know that. And yes, we have in fact seen a lot of changes that RBL Bank went through in last couple of years. And you're right. In fact, everybody is asking for a digital transformation. I was talking to a PSU banker, just a month back, and he said, the first order that I have given to all my officers is, I do not want to see a paper in the office. So, so it's quite interesting, and we can actually copy you. Mr. Datta, I will bring you here, and you come from a technology background. So, if I could ask you, how are you seeing the digital journey of the Indian bank, specifically in last 2 years, and how do you see it going ahead?
Thanks, Amol. And I think good insights. And I like the term challenger banks, as you mentioned, that Mr. Banerjee used. From my perspective, I've in my career, I've sold core banking solutions. I'm selling digital banking solutions. So I've seen a lot of, pretty much the entire gamut of operations of a financial institution. If I look at India, and if I sort of zone down in what's happening in India, I think one of the advantages that India has had over the last, I would say, 10 years, the last decade, is that both the government as well as the regulators have been probably the most pro-innovation regime that I've seen across the region. I've had a lot of exposure across Asia, and I can boldly say that in India, our governments in the last 10 years, our regulator, RBI, the sort of regulations that they have come out with, whether it's about data, whether it's about cloud, whether it's about the sort of innovations that banks can do, has been way ahead of anybody in the region. But having said that, what I've also seen is that banks, and in India, it's very difficult to typecast banks as one single entity because there are different size of banks and different types of banks, right? But what I've also seen is that banks have been struggling broadly on their digital first priorities as they compete for resources. I mean, while India is a land of labor and there are a lot of people available, but getting the right people and getting the right resources has always been a challenge. But having said that, I would also like to put here that, when we're talking about digital journey of Indian banks, you have to look at it from multiple perspectives. On one hand, there are the the behemoths or the big banks, the large public sector banks, the large private sector banks. On the other hand, there are these, small finance banks or the payment banks. And then there's a very sweet spot, as Mr. Banerjee said, for challenger banks. Now in India, as Amol, you rightly mentioned, not a lot of banks have been willing to get into that space. While I've seen that in other countries, if you look at countries like Philippines, or if you look at countries like Indonesia, there have been these challenger banks who are not that big in terms of, let's say, their total assets or the number of branches, but they have carved out a very niche area for them where people like to bank with them. And I think slowly in India, RBL probably has been one of the first banks who have gone that way, where probably not in terms of branches or in terms of the number of people, they are not the biggest, but in terms of innovation, in terms of the experience, in terms of the engagement that they offer for their customers, they are carving out a niche. So to cut a long story short, I think the digital journey of Indian banks has been pretty interesting. It has been backed by a very strong government and regulator, but banks need to innovate more and more to move out of their comfort zone and move to a direction where RBL has shown a path, to that you need not be the largest bank, but you could still be the first bank to, create an API developer portal like RBL has done, and so many other things. I'm pretty sure Mr. Banerjee is going to talk about them. But yeah, that's my
Right.
subject.
Right, Mr. Datta. In fact, I was coming to that. As Mr. Banerjee spoke about BaaS, banking as a service or open API. In fact, my immediate question I wanted to ask Mr. Banerjee, and Mr. Banerjee, this is for you. But, considering the digital banking which everybody is adopting right now, what are the essentials that every bank should look at right now? Because compared to private PSU banks, private banks have done a lot of innovative things, and now PSU banks are also doing. Payment bank and SFB, small finance banks, are also following. So with your wide experience and learnings, what do you think are the essentials that every bank should look at going ahead?
So I must tell you, it's not true that all PSU banks are laggards in digital banking. Some of them are leaders, actually.
Okay.
Some PSU banks have indeed invested ahead of the curve and done some fairly good things, better than some private banks.
Right.
That said, to my mind, digital banking has three essentials. One is the consumer experience.
Okay.
We use digital means of providing a consumer experience as opposed to physical means, which means, so I would think of call center as a physical means, even though, of course, call centers sound vaguely digital, but they're basically the same call center as your analog telephones used to have. So I would think of that as a physical means as well. We are therefore focusing a lot more on a digital customer experience,
Okay.
which means self-service through MyCard, Mobank, retail banking, mobiles, through chatbots, through various other methods of servicing a customer so that he can directly interact with the bank without a person or a human in between.
Yes.
And that has proved to be, especially in COVID times, but before that also, a very strong trend in our market. And it has not been restricted by age or by demographic or by, millennials versus anything else. 70-year-old women also have adopted digital banking in quite a large way. And this is a reflective of society in general. Facebook's adoption is across the board. WhatsApp's adoption is across the board. All education levels, all age levels, all kinds of society backgrounds. And we see banks mirroring that. So that's one part that a bank has to do well if it plans to go digital. It has to be available through digital channels. People don't complain by calling a call center. Nowadays people complain to the government of India using Twitter. So there's no question that a bank also must be ready to accept Twitter-based complaints. A bank must be ready to accept interactions that are not through their approved channels. Must be ready to study social media to see how a customer reacts to it, must be present in the channels that the customer is present in. And this is again not just retail. Remember, your corporate customers are just as digitally savvy as your retail customer. They are in fact the same customer in two different contexts. And so therefore, that is one part. The second part is that banks must offer API-based services to their customers. Banking is a service, but we have thought of banks as an institution where banking happens. Increasingly, banking is not happening inside banks. Increasingly, banking is happening across the network of which one player is a bank. So payments is a good example. Payments is traditionally a banking service, but as we know, even in India and in China and in Brazil and in the US, very often the payments network is only weakly supported by banks. Only the last leg sometimes is handled by a bank, or sometimes not at all. And therefore, banking as a service has become far more important than banks as an institution. And that is one more transformation that digital banks have to follow in the digital journey. They have to become a participant in this flow of banking as opposed to becoming the institution which executes the flow. The third transformation that banks have to do is the internal transformation. You cannot be digitally facing externally without being digital internally. You can be for a while, but eventually that catches up to you. So banks started off by being digital hybrids. NEFT is a good example. NEFT used to be electronic on the consumer end, but batch based on the back end, including paper based approvals in many cases. So now we have slowly moved out of that. And things like IMPS or UPI have even from scratch have no such manual interface. They are straight through processing right from day one. And banks increasingly have to become that. Internally also, we have to become straight through processes. Otherwise, this digital hybrid model, where we take a traditional model and add the digital interface, does not scale beyond a point. Beyond a point, it becomes a fight between the limitations of the internal process and the promises of the external process. So everybody goes away unhappy after a while. And that is a challenge that banks have increasingly faced. Some banks have faced it much worse than others,
Right.
but almost every bank is transforming to face this challenge, these three challenges.
I think you gave a detailed perspective. In fact, I would like you to speak more on VAS. But Mr. Datta, since you are talking about the challenges, not the challenger bank, if you could give me more highlights about what are the gray areas that you think or you have seen or you have witnessed, or if you could share any case study in terms of the major pain points that the bank or the BFSI companies face while adopting digital or any technology.
Yeah, Amol. I think again, I'll take some inputs from what Mr. Banerjee said, and especially true for the context of India. While there has been a lot of focus on retail customers and consumers, the single consumers, while the SMEs and the corporates are equally digitally savvy, unfortunately, in India at least, the digitization for that line of business has not yet matured. You look at all data points. That is where banks make their actual money from the corporate business, from trade finance, from doing liquidity management and all of that, right? But that process, while it is, on paper, you can call it digital because there is an online interface, but the straight through processing that Mr. Banerjee was also talking about earlier is still not there. And why it is not there, and I'm talking, this is a gray area that I'm talking about. Why it is not there is that in India, there are still banks who are relying so much on their back-end core systems, which are old legacy. While everybody might say that I have open APIs from a core banking perspective, that really does not make you a modern system, right? So, and that is where banks get restricted. That because they are thinking probably inside out, and because they are inhibited by their core systems, servicing their retail customers who have lesser demands from a transaction or a processing perspective might be easier, but servicing a corporate customer becomes that much difficult. So that is one gray area. Now, if you talk about other data points, and earlier this year, Backbase and IDC, we had come out with our own banking trends in Asia Pacific report, and we saw that in India, when we looked at it, 60% of banks are struggling to offer a content which is intuitive, which is relevant, and which is personalized. Now, we can all offer content. We can put up information in a nice look and feel, but as I said, it's not intuitive enough, it's not relevant enough, and it's not personalized enough through the digital channels that the customer is interacting with, right? So the bank or the financial institution should be able to achieve an ability to evolve their digital propositions, integrate with third-party functionalities. As Mr. Banerjee said, banks have to let go of the value chain. They cannot stay in a world where they say that I want to control the value chain. Rather, you have to participate in a value chain and bring in what you're strongest in, right? So it's an ecosystem play that you see more and more. Payments, classic example. Banks are probably just doing the last leg. So why don't you bring in that last leg where you are strong in, rather than try and compete with a payments provider who is specializing in that? So I think that is also a big challenge or a gray area. The third thing, and this I like keep talking about this, is we hear this word personalization, but I think we have moved beyond that across the region as a financial institution, that banks cannot look at just personalization, but they need to look at hyper personalization at scale.
Right.
They need, see, there is a fight of being the most preferred banking app today. The fight is not about being a good bank. The fight is about, am I the most preferred banking app? What is the rating that I have on a Play Store or an App Store? What is my release cycle? A bank, millennials are looking forward to every month is the bank launching new features on their app, right?
Yeah.
So that is where the KPIs of that the bank needs to set internally also becomes very crucial. The KPIs are not just traditional business KPIs, but the KPIs also need to be digital KPIs for specific productions and specific points of the customer life cycle. So while there are movements in the right direction, there are a lot of things happening, but there are some of these gray areas around SMEs, around corporates, around hyper personalization, around offering relevant and intuitive information, which is obviously a work in progress and will smoothen up as time passes on and as people mature and as banks mature.
Right. Thanks, Mr. Datta, for that comment. Mr. Banerjee, I would like you to, not a straightforward question, I don't have, but, if you could give me your viewpoint on two aspects. One is, till now we were thinking about banks as the institutions, BFSI companies are the institutions. You said that, you are looking at a bank as an institution, but now everybody's talking about BaaS, okay, banking as a service. So how do you see banks are going to go ahead? Are they working like a Swiggy? Are they going to work like a Netflix? Are they going to work like an e-commerce company and provide as many services as possible to their customers? Because now customers are looking for that. So how do you see the banking model going ahead?
So if you notice, traditionally banks used to have the most impressive buildings in every downtown of every city. So it used to have, like, Bombay, the center, the fort still has the most impressive buildings in the fort are Hong Kong Bank and Standard Chartered, and this is traditionally how banks have been. They have provided solidity and security, which is reflected in the buildings they choose. Increasingly, solidity and security are taken for granted, partly because there is a large regulatory pressure to make sure that their things are secure by design, as opposed to by institution. And therefore, there is this move away from this core assumption that banks are solid and secure, or the core value of a bank being solid and secure with your money, to being more service oriented. How does a bank provide better service to the customers that need banking services? This redefinition is a bit difficult for banks, because we are also struggling with what exactly better service means. And in the banking as a service model, better service often does not mean what traditionally it used to mean, because you can't have a call center for an API based. A server will not call your call center, right? So what does a server to server communication, what do people expect as better service? And we realized there are a couple of things that we expect. One is extremely high transaction volumes relative to what we have today. Now, today, most banks are 20 to 30 transactions per second. Some are 50. Most banks globally don't exceed 100 transactions a second. Compare this to capital markets, which routinely exceed 500,000 transactions a second. And therefore, it's a big gap. And, Alipay, for instance, Alibaba Singles Day is coming up. Alibaba Singles Days last year was 600,000 transactions nearly per second for long periods of time, not just 1 second. And obviously, Alibaba's backend payment gateway needs similarly 600,000 payments per second, right? And increasingly, banks are being left out of this profitable market because they are still at 30, 40, 50 transactions a second. People are saying, okay, then I'll do it directly myself. Why should I go to a bank? But we are hoping that, except for the largest customers, if we can scale up, other customers will say, why not go to a bank? Why should I build my own payment infrastructure? If the bank can provide the kind of service that we are expecting, we have to therefore scale up to that expectation, which we think is not less than a few thousand transactions a second. Most people will not want 500,000, but most people will want a few thousand, which is still much bigger than we have today. The second is in straight through processing, a big element of service is real time instant reconciliation and transaction status. This is again not something banks are very good at doing. We tend to keep all this information within ourselves. And there are lots of concerns, and we have to work through those concerns. There are privacy concerns, there are regulatory concerns, there are all kinds of other concerns in sharing transaction update statuses, and we have to be careful about it. But the fact is, it is his transaction, so it is his statuses. There is no legal barrier. There are a lot of procedural barriers, and those we have to overcome. And typically, we realize that banking as a service, customers expect that as good service, that they can be constantly updated as to what is happening in their transaction, and therefore be able to report back to either their other systems or their transactions or their fraud management engines or their customer management engines what these transactions are and where they are. So this communication of metadata, of transactions, of demographics, of statistics, that again is something that banks are learning to do. And if you see in the rest of the financial world, capital markets learned to do this some time ago because of automated trading. Automated trading is now the big trading. Automated trading is all, you could say, capital markets as a service.
Yes.
Yeah, humans don't interact with the market. That went away some years ago. And therefore, they learned to do this servicing of statuses or metadata in real time in high volumes. Banks are now learning to do it for the rest of the financial institutions.
I think that's a
key aspect of servicing that I see as the game-changing requirements of today.
I think very well answered. In fact, it's an honest opinion. In fact, the perspective to say that which way the customers would like to have their service on. I think because most of the customers are also looking for a Swiggy-like experience, Netflix-like experience.
In fact, Swiggy is a good example. At
Yes,
Swiggy,
yes.
they tell you have ordered. Okay, restaurant has accepted. Kitchen is cooking the meal. Person has picked up the meal, is on his way. You can see within the 20-30 meters of where he is, right? That is the kind of transactional information that if you transferred $500,000 from India to US, you will not get. You will get it for a 20 rupee pizza. You will not get it for $500,000 transfer. $500,000 transfer, you will get a status saying in progress. Right. Then 2 days later, if you're lucky, you will say it has reached. That's it. Nothing in between.
Yeah, I mean, at least we can see some improvement in NEFT.
I've never actually transferred $500,000, just to tell you, but it doesn't matter what the amount is. The fact is, we are not geared to this kind of real-time update, and people want that Swiggy-like experience.
No, I agree with you. Why I said this is because most of the times when I speak to CIOs or CTOs, they use this interesting terms. We want to give a Swiggy-like experience or Netflix-like experience. That's why I said which sounds really good. And yes, I mean that's quite. So in fact, it's a very good point that you said that how to offer a better service is also under evaluation. What will customers like is also under evaluation. Mr. Datta, we are seeing a different trend now. We spoke about challenger banks, though India doesn't have any challenger bank as such. There are many banks like like Mr. Banerjee said, that who aim to be adopt an innovation like a challenger bank. But we have a lot of fintechs, we have a lot of neobanks emerging, and they are trying to offer a model which is kind of similar to challenger bank, and they're going to offer a better service, and everything is in a seamless manner. How do you see that proposition ramping up in the BFSI space now?
Yeah, I was expecting this question, Amol, because in all discussions we end up talking about neobanks or greenfield banks. But I think it's a good segue because we spoke about the Netflix and the Swiggies, right? What is important to see, and you also mentioned, Amol, that there are a lot of CIOs and banking executives who say that we want to offer service like that. What is important to see, and I'm pretty sure Mr. Banerjee in RBL has definitely seen through that, is that where a Netflix or where a Swiggy really sets itself apart is the fact that they are in the platform play. And again, platform play is a very, very broad term, but what are we trying to solve through a platform play? I think basic things that we are trying to solve is one, let's try and bucket it into 4 different areas. One is that it's through a platform play, you're trying to offer a customer experience that meets the expectations of speed of execution. I think Mr. Banerjee was saying that you can see where your order is, 20 minutes, 5 minutes. So it meets that expectation of speed of execution as well as the personalization via the channel of choice. So it will remember you as a customer. It will remember the context of a customer. That is the first thing. The second thing, I spoke about relevant and intuitive information earlier. So the second thing is excellence in business processes, both internal and external, that will matter to that particular customer at that particular point of time. It cannot be broad based. It cannot be like a cookie cutter application, which is like one size fits all. So that is the second thing. The third thing is, again, I spoke about hyper personalization and scale. So it has to be those personalized customer interactions, which is built on knowledge and insights of the customer. Now, for that, I'm not saying that we need to go full blog, full hog like into AI and ML. No, those are definitely good things to do. But you can start with small things. You can start tracking events of customers that they are doing on your application, and based on those events, create simple rules to create those personalized customer interaction, right? So I'll give you a very simple example. From a corporate banking perspective, look at a customer's cash flow. If you can project the cash flow in the future and you can see that 2 months down the line, there might be a potential negative or negative cash flow that he or she will have, can you push in an overdraft saying that, hey, it seems that you will go negative a couple of months down line because of your payables and receivables. Why don't you look at this overdraft? So those personalized customer interactions built on the insights that you have of the customer. And the fourth thing, obviously, we talk about omni-channel and multi-channel. So that connected experience that integrates multiple channels, that integrates workflows, that integrates business processes, and that integrates that personalized content. So I think if you are looking at a platform play to achieve these four things, that entire threat of neobanks, challenger banks could be looked at. Because if you look at what neobanks are doing or what challenger banks are doing, not so much in India, as you mentioned, there are not so many neobanks in India, but since we operate across the globe and in Asia, where we are seeing a lot of neobanks coming up in countries like Philippines, Vietnam, and Indonesia, what is their operating model? Their operating model is a model which is less dependent on fees. It is more dependent on offering, let's say, personalized rewards and catering what they call to the millennial audience, right? So despite the fact that there would be that question that can I really invest my money in a neobank? Can I invest my money in a bank which does not have a long history or a long backing? These banks are going to offer a challenge for some of the larger banks purely because of their operating model. And their operating model, as I mentioned earlier, is being achieved through a platform play. Now, my last point is also that when we're talking about a platform play, what I mentioned earlier, those 4 points were around the final output. But what is happening internally is essentially very simple things. APIs, which Mr. Banerjee spoke about. I think open banking, and what do I mean by open banking is letting customers have control of their ecosystem, right? So that is the second thing. And the third thing, more from a technology perspective, is move away from these monolithic applications to more Lego building block, microservices based architecture, where you can spin off services at your own will. So that's where we are looking at, Amol. Neobank entities are emerging. They will appear as a threat, but that does not mean that traditional banks or incumbent banks cannot really match up to the threat. It's a matter of getting your operating model right.
Right, Mr. Datta. In fact, the watch is ticking. The time is, getting over. But we'll just take one or two small, quick questions. Mr. Banerjee, I would like to talk about neobanks because everybody these days is talking about neobanks, and in fact, there is earlier we started with is the fintechs. Are the fintechs threat to our banks? Now we are seeing the collaboration between the fintechs and the banks. But how do you look at neobanks? Is it a threat? Is it a space that you would like to partner with? What kind of partnerships do you look at? What is your overall view on the neobanks?
So neobanks basically come in a lot of different flavors. Some are actually not real banks. They are fintechs that add a layer between the customer and the bank and continue using an actual bank in the backend. Because banks, there's been these UK neobanks like Tide, which are not actually banks. There is an actual bank underneath it, or Simple in the US, which was backed by a regular physical bank. So those are actually fintechs. They are called neobanks because the experience is new, not because they are redefining banking. There are actual neobanks also, which are trying to redefine banking, which are full-fledged payment services providers or full-fledged banking services, loan services providers. So Revolut or Ant Financial was for a time a full-fledged neobank. Now, of course, Ant has changed his regulatory stance, has become a layer in between. They route their transactions to other banks. Increasingly, we are seeing the development of this middle layer much more than the actual challengers, who redefine banking itself. It turns out banking is very hard to redefine. People have been at it for a while, and the current set of services that banks offer are hard to substitute. What is possible to do is to improve on that current level. And that improvement layer is what many different neobanks are offering in many different ways. So, lending, for instance, there is a traditional risk model that banks have. Neobanks can provide another layer of risk modeling. So they can model risk in different ways that banks cannot do, or don't have the expertise to do, or don't have the intention to do, or don't have the data to do. So Ant Financial takes Alibaba.com's data and models its loans, which the independent Chinese banks cannot do because they don't have the data. They have the models, but they don't have the data. There are others across India, across the globe, that have taken different credit scoring models, student data, social medium data, and produced credit facilities for certain sections of the population. And especially RBL has been very aggressive in adopting the backend. We are happy to be their backend. We are happy to provide the funds required to do the actual lending and work with them to make sure that their credit risk scoring and their experience is a viable, feasible model. So that is a very common place for banks and fintechs to partner with. On the others, where people have tried redefining banking, and there are, especially in Europe, this has become a few banks have started trying to redefine banking. Life has not been spectacularly successful. In fact, most neobanks, especially during pandemic times, have suffered far more than traditional banks. And it seems that the reasons are that, one, they don't have the sufficient breadth of offerings to be able to survive a shock in one offering. If you're offering only one kind, let's say payments, then if your payments infrastructure is challenged by something like a pandemic or other economic downturns, then you don't have anything else to fall back on. So then you suffer far more than a traditional full service bank does. And there are other cases where people have seen their models not quite work out the way they expected, in which case, of course, they, again, same thing, they don't always understand how to lend. The models that we follow, of course, have been refined over a long period of time. They may not be the best models, but they are definitely well understood. So their downsides are understood as well as their upsides. In some cases, the upsides are well understood of the new banks, but not their downsides. And sometimes that creates a lot of challenges. And this is true of other industries, other emerging industries as well. E-commerce, many e-commerce players did not survive because they did not understand the costs of e-commerce and not just the market penetrating benefits.
Right.
So we see something similar will happen to banks. Okay. Some new banks will eventually get the mix right and be spectacularly successful. It does not mean that the other banks will get wiped out, but it does mean that some banks will lose their most profitable customers. So we therefore have to be careful to be able to respond effectively to these neobank challenges. For the other ones, the other kind of neobanks, which are extra layers on top of banking, their partnership is probably the best way to go. And again, traditionally, banks have been wary of partnerships. Banks traditionally have said that we will do everything. We can't share our data. We can't share our interfaces. And that is changing quite rapidly. And, challenger banks like us, small banks, are in fact more aggressive here than others. We have a lot of partnerships. In fact, we are India's largest credit merchant acquirer, largely through partnerships.
Okay.
And things like that. I mean, that's how we grow. That's how we scale. And that is how we respond to the market also. The market is changing faster than we ourselves can model it. And therefore, it makes sense for us to let somebody else with the brains, with the technology, with the data to model it. And we provide the core banking services, which is the risk management on top of money, which is the collection of funds from the market and the management of that fund at scale.
I think that was a detailed answer, Mr. Banerjee, on the neobanks. And yes, your points are valid that, neobank, could not do much better in the pandemic compared to the traditional banks. In fact, we have there are a lot of reports about the Australian bank called Jinja, and everybody has spoken about it. But now, and everybody was talking about the growth story. But in pandemic, we have seen a major problems, that bank is facing in Australia. So I think yes, all these emerging models sounds good, but I think yes, they don't have that traditional experience which the most of the institutions like you have. So I think time is up, but I will take a small, just last one quick question. And Mr. Banerjee, start with you only. Let's discuss the future of banking as quick as possible, and tell me, what is going to be the future of banking? Is it going to be platform? Is it going to be service? How do you say it?
So banking will boil down to a few things. One is banks, all said and done, their main role is to collect savings from a large number of people and efficiently deploy that money. That is the core role of a bank. The core role of a bank is not branches and interfaces and customer service. The core role of a bank is to aggregate money, savings from a large population, and then deploy those savings in a well managed, risk managed way to the industry. That role will continue to become more and more and more important as we use technology to make it better, to improve our risk analytics, to improve our credit modeling, to improve our straight through processes. That role is not going anywhere. Not only that, that role is growing bigger and bigger and bigger. As economies expand, banking as a service becomes more and more important. And so that we will continue to do well and better and better. The second part is we also deal a large amount of time with actual transactions. And we see banking becoming better at servicing these transactions, providing customer service to institutions, providing customer service to individuals. And that will become more and more of a platform play, where individuals will become one component of that platform. And in fact, the same individual from the same bank may be serviced by more than one platform.
I think sounds good to me. In fact, a good one. Mr. Datta, how do you see? Because everything is going to depend on the technology going ahead. So obviously, the role of the tech companies is also going to be very, very crucial. So how do you see the future of banking and specifically adding tech into it?
So I just try to sum it up in 4 questions, and these are questions that we try to help banks and our partners solve, right? As Mr. Banerjee said, a bank's role is very limited: collect money and distribute the money in other places to sort of earn interest. But the 4 questions where we try and help, and I think that's important, is first, as a bank, how do you distinguish yourself from others? Because there is not a lot to differentiate when it comes to offering. So how do you distinguish yourself? That is one. Second is, are you focusing enough on the customer? Everybody obviously focuses on the customer, but are you focusing enough on them? I mean, looking at insights, looking at data, looking at content, right? So that is the second question. Third is, I like talking about it, but how do you scale? The benefits of reusability, repeatability, plug and play, flexibility, right? How do you scale? And that is where a platform story comes in to help you win the digital race, customer by customer. And the fourth question is, you have done all of this, you have distinguished yourself, you're focusing on customers, you are scaling, but how do you sustain that journey? It's not about the next 2 years or 3 years, but this digital race is an ongoing journey, right? So how do you sustain this? So if a bank is able to get an answer for some of these questions and then solve those particular points, I think that is where the future of banking would lie, and it would not be a one size fits all for all banks. Every bank will find their own niche, every bank will find their own sweet spot, and they will innovate around that. So that's my point here, Amol.
Well, thank you so much for that note, Mr. Datta, and also thank you so much, Mr. Banerjee, for sharing the perspective. It was great to have you on etbfsi.com. Thank you so much for your participation.